everybody. Welcome to our advocacy training today. My name is Heather Smith, and I'm a faculty member here in our Human Development Counseling program. And to begin with, I think I'd like to introduce Terniqua Kennedy. She is the president of the Middle Tennessee Counseling Association. She has a few words for you today.
I'll be very brief. Welcome. I'm excited to see some familiar faces from the St. Drama workshop in October. But I'm the president of the Middle Tennessee Counseling Association. Excited to have another opportunity to partner. We also have an upcoming one-day conference on the 25th. So if that's something that you may be interested in, there are some good sessions that are planned for that day. So I hope that you all will decide to join us as well.
I'd like to take a moment and thank all of you for participating in this event. And those of you who will be watching this video in the near future. Kat Coy, the president of the Tennessee Counseling Association, recently stated, "When something is important to us, we show up." So thank you for showing up. I'm here today also representing the Tennessee Association for Specialists in Group Work. I would like to share with you another quote. This is borrowed from the Nobel laureate Bertrand Russell, which summarizes what I have found to be evident in my study of group dynamics, social power, and social policy. He said, "The fundamental concept in social science is power, in the same sense in which energy is a fundamental concept in physics." I am so proud to be a member of the counseling profession. We train our professionals to carefully consider the influence of social power on the individual at all group levels, from the attitudes and ideologies of cultures, to the influence of politics, media, social services, various industries, health services, schools, religious communities, family, and peer groups. Take a moment and look at the people around you. As a group of counselors, we have spent years and accomplished many milestones required in the progression towards licensure as counselors. As professionally trained counselors, we are among the very best in protecting clients and students as it pertains to the delivery of professional counseling services. But we must recognize that as professional counselors, most of us have not probably spent years immersed in politics or the legislative process. Yet who better to inform legislators about the profession of counseling than us? Who better to have conversations with legislators who are not trained in professional counseling than those of us who are? Legislators should never write legislation that impacts our ability to provide professional counseling services without our voice, without our input. When we as a profession have years of history studying how to protect the public in regard to the delivery of counseling services. So at times when I feel a bit defeated as I hear about various pieces of legislation, I realize that here in the state of Tennessee, legislators' actions have now resulted in greater cohesion among us as counselors in Tennessee, probably more so than in all the years I've lived here. It brings me joy to realize how professional counselors, counseling students, and counselor educators have come together as a result. There is no doubt in my mind that we are stronger together. Many of you have asked me, what can I do? What can I do? And this training is our response. Today we hope to provide the information necessary to answer your questions. What can I do? So it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, President-elect of TCA and Public Policy and Legislative Chair, Lisa Henderson.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
How come we didn't have to have a mic?
I mean, Let me see about this. If it's a little bit feedbacky or tinny or something, I can just talk louder without the mic. So should we take a vote? All for the mic? Oh, everyone's okay with it? Okay, great. So I have some handouts. I generally don't print handouts for trainings that I give, but I thought that in this case there might just be too much to write down. So I went ahead and printed it all out. You can tell that I'm not used to printing out handouts because it looks fine on the big screen, but once it's printed, it's a little hard to see. So I apologize for that, but hopefully it'll be helpful for reference as we go along. You also picked up on your way in, or I hope you picked up, this 2-page sheet. This is something that was sent to me by ACA, so I guess it's actually 3 pages, front and back, and in this front. Scott McConomy is the state legislative chairperson at the American Counseling Association. So he's been working with me and sent me this resource. So we're actually going to go through it and really break it down because it seems really simple. Here's a step-by-step list of suggestions, but when you actually start looking at them, each one of them is a little bit meaty. So we'll get into that. We'll do that in a minute.
Quick question.
Yes?
Because this probably won't make it around, would you be willing to send this to us and we can post it for everybody?
Absolutely.
I can make more.
Yeah, sure. Make it a little easier. Well, good. So that means we have more than 70 people in the room. That's exciting. So that we can get notes after all. I'm going to bail on the mic. Okay. All right. How's that? Better? Yeah. Less painful? More energy too, right? I was sort of doing my NPR voice on the mic, so this will keep us amped up a little bit better. Is that going to be okay for the video? Okay, great. So we're videoing this because not everybody could come. We've gotten so many questions from across the state of what is going on and what do we do and how does this work, that we decided let's try and serve as many people as we possibly can. I am, as she said, I'm Lisa Henderson. I'm president-elect of TCA, and I also stumbled into legislative chairperson. I'll tell you that story in a minute. But I'm also a co-founder of a telehealth company for mental health service delivery. So it just makes sense for me to put things on platforms that can disseminate far and wide. So here we are. The way that I got involved in legislation hopefully will give you all hope that you can do it too. I don't know if you guys remember a couple years ago when they were trying to expand Medicare and Medicaid in our state. With the Affordable Care Act, states were asked to expand in their own states. Our state chose not to. They did not want to sign on to something that was so ambiguous and nebulous, and they didn't know what the cost was going to be. And from a financial standpoint, it made pretty good sense. You don't want to sign off on a check that you don't know how much it's for. I get that. But our governor, Bill Haslam, tried 3 times to pass a version that Tennessee lawmakers would approve of. And 3 times it got shut down. So our Republican governor, who's pretty good at money, he's pretty good with money, he's the richest governor of all governors, he gets it, couldn't get this passed. So when that was happening, I realized, you know what, the first and foremost issue that expanding Medicare and Medicaid would address is mental health. And we've said no, and our association hasn't played a role in that. We haven't made a statement, we haven't advocated, we haven't lobbied. Okay, we need to change that. What does that mean? And so I volunteered to be legislative chairperson so that I would be able to make a statement on behalf of our organization on expanding Medicare and Medicaid so that people could get mental health services that they needed. So I started that in, it was July, and then in February, this got dropped into our laps. So really, I guess in January, last January is when we really started to know about SB 1556, HB 1840. So that was the bill last year that said that a counselor may refer a client if the client's goals or outcomes of counseling were in conflict with the counselor's personally held beliefs. Personally held principles is the final language in that. So I didn't actually get to do what I thought I was going to do. I didn't get to sit back a year, learn the process, figure out what's happening, figure out how to get involved, and then thoughtfully enter into the process. I had to all of a sudden answer phone calls from reporters and testify before our legislative body and meet with people who are apparently members of our profession but aren't engaged in anything related to our profession. And what I learned from that is that, gosh, you know what? A lot of people call themselves counselors, and they aren't. Okay, and our lawmakers don't know the difference. So if you call your lawmaker and you say, hi, my name is Lisa, I'm a counselor, I live in your district, here's what I think about this, they don't vet you. They don't ask for your license number or ask to speak to your professor or advisor to double check that you are. So I had to pick it all up pretty quickly and be able to help them understand, okay, just because you call yourself a counselor doesn't mean that you are one. This is years of training, years of supervision, decades of research, and we do things very systematically. So there are a lot of parallels between advocating and counseling. And so this is a chance for, how many students do we have in the room? You ever have that feeling where it's like, just let me at it. Let me get out there, let me do the work. I feel like I can do it, I'm ready, I'm trained. Here's your chance. Use all those skills with advocacy. So we'll go through a few things, but I want to give you a little bit of background on how we think about these things, because this is all new. So I told you about not knowing anything last year and having to learn it on the fly. Well, one of the things I learned was, geez Louise, people who have lobbyists get a lot more done than we do. So we got a lobbyist, and it was really hard to get one. They're expensive, and if you don't know how to hire or interview or manage a lobbyist, there's a learning process. And I was very, very lucky that last year I got to work closely with the lobbying firm that ACA hired. So that was a different firm than what we're working with now because we couldn't afford them. So they were kind enough to work with me and kind of help me understand, here's how this goes. Then they recommended that I interview a couple of other lobbyists, ended up hiring someone that they recommended, and he knows our field very well. He has a background that is adjacent to our field, so he's got that great knowledge of here's what I know and here's what I know I don't know. So it's sort of like, for me, my parallel to that is I started off with a bachelor's degree in psychology. I got a master's degree in health education and promotion, became a health coach, knew enough to know, ooh, that's not education, that's depression, and I don't have the credentials to deal with that. So I knew enough to know when to take a step back and refer that to a professional until I became that professional. That's the same with our lobbyist. He knows enough about what we do to know, okay, I'm going to take a step back and let the experts inform on this issue. And that's exactly what we need. So it's been great working with him. And he is the reason that we have a lot of the framework that we're working through right now. His name is Chris Ford, by the way. He's not a mystical creature. I think you call him by name. So one of the first things that we talked about when we met was how do we decide what we want to see changed? How do we decide what's important for us to spend our time, our resources, our political capital on? And resources are not just money. That's a big resource, but also we have time and we also have energy, and we also have just kind of buzz. So we'll get to SB1 in just a minute, but it was very strategic. You may have noticed that we put out a couple of things about SB1 and that we were opposed to it, but we didn't blast it. We didn't call the media. We didn't engage in a lot of back and forth on it, and that was strategic. So I'll get into that in just a minute. But our mission for Tennessee Counseling Association is to enhance the quality of life in Tennessee and society by promoting the development of professional counselors, advancing the counseling profession, and using the profession and practice of counseling to promote respect for human dignity and diversity. We can all get down with that, right? So there's a lot of legislation out there that may call into question human dignity, diversity, so it may be in conflict with some of our mission. However, what we are really here, the key points are promote the development of professional counselors, advance the counseling profession, and then through those things is how we advocate for human dignity and diversity. So we've got two primary goals, which are the reason that TCA exists. And those are, say it with me, development of professional counselors, advancement of the profession. So with those two things in mind, that's how we decide what we're going to get involved with and what we're going to support our coalition partners in getting involved with. So there's very little that we actually say, you know what, that's not ours, we don't have anything to do with that. There's some, but not a lot. But we do make some very important decisions about what level of involvement to get into. So here's our decision-making process. Basically, how does this legislation affect my ability to engage in the practice of counseling? So I'm going to ask you that over and over tonight as we're going through some of the bills that are up. How does this piece of legislation affect my ability to engage in the practice of counseling? And so the options that we have from that are we can either oppose it, we can be neutral on it, or we can support it. And then this actually gets broken out into a broader matrix of, all right, so we're going to oppose this. Are we going to take the lead on it, or are we going to support our coalition partners? Because those are two very different ways of going about things. So before we get into the actual bills, any questions, thoughts, comments? Did you know there was so much behind just putting out there, hey, call your senator? Never that easy. So let's start with SB1. Do you guys remember, you know how you have those moments in life where it's like, I will always remember this moment. I will always remember where I was and what I was doing when I found out this piece of information. I was driving in a rental car in Texas on the border of Mexico going through Border Patrol when I got a call that said, hey, it happened. He filed it. So we were waiting on something like this, but I didn't think it would be the very first bill filed. I didn't think it would come on December 2nd. And on December 4th is when I found out about it, that Monday, or 5th, I guess, that Monday. I was in Texas, in a very remote part of Texas, on a company retreat. It was remote on purpose so that we wouldn't be distracted. And I was like having a panic attack, like I can't be remote, I can't be offline, I have to respond. Luckily, we were able to find the top of a mountain, literally the top of a mountain where I got cell phone service, and my poor business partner had to drive me up to the top of the mountain because I grew up in Nashville. I don't know how to drive off-road, and he didn't want me in his truck. So he drove me to the top of the mountain where we had an hour and a half or plus conference call until I lost service. The phone died, and I was like, I am not built for the country. But it was great. It was a nice little getaway other than this. So what this says basically is that our board, just ours, no other board, but we happen to share a board with marriage and family therapists and clinical pastoral therapists. So our board may not refer to a third-party code of ethics as our code of ethics. So anybody else can, but we can't. So that was our angle on this, because Senator Johnson, a few pro tips along the way. Manners matter, and when I get heated, sometimes I forget that. And when I get flustered, sometimes I forget that. And so, and flustered not just in a bad way, but Senator Jeff Yarborough is my senator. And I saw him, I had met with him, he was wonderful. We were, really kind of jiving with what we wanted to happen on some things. Saw him a week later, and I was so excited to see him. I was like, Jeff, what's up? And our lobbyist was like, you mean Senator Yarborough? I was like, oh, sorry. First name's not okay in the Capitol. So if I saw him out and we were actually friends, then it would be fine. But we're not. We're, colleagues, and I don't know him that well. And so just as a pro tip, it's always Senator or Representative last name. So Senator Johnson had said in all of his interviews, he had said that this is very important that we not defer the codes of conduct to entities that Tennesseans don't have oversight over, and that this is just good policy, and that this is what is good for Tennessee in general. And our response to that was, okay, maybe I can see where you're coming from on that, but if it's good policy, then it's good for everyone. Why just us? And so eventually, through lots of conversations, and that's why we didn't blast everything out and cause all kinds of hullabaloo. Last year, I had, not of my own doing, but certainly of my own responsiveness to, I'm in private practice, I would have reporters show up at my office. They would set up in the waiting room, wait for me to get out of session, ask me a few questions on camera, and then I would go back into session with my next client. We tried to make sure none of that happened this year. We didn't want a big media storm. We didn't want media attention. That was a big part of what went wrong last year, was that another thing I've learned is that politics in Washington, D.C. are very different from politics in Nashville, Tennessee. And so in Washington, D.C., they're accustomed to these big campaigns with fancy PR firms that, kind of drive this message. Well, that is not the way it's done here. And that just reinforced that we don't need outside entities putting their fingers in what goes on in Tennessee. So we made sure not to do any of that. We were very respectful. We had lots of sit-down meetings. We discussed every angle of this. And we really did a good job this year of Senator Johnson's constituents reaching out to him and talking to him. Now, another pro tip is that you will see on your second sheet of this little handout that there's actually a meeting report. And I think what's helpful about this, I'm not exactly sure, I've not used this. This is not the way that I operate in practice. But I think that being familiar with this to set your agenda going into the meeting and know what you want to say is really important. It helps you stay on track and on message with what you want. But I think what's important here is that on the Likert scales, the last one, level of agreement with you on the issue, we might want to add another one, a fourth one below that, that says perceived level agreement with the senator. Because what I noticed is that a lot of counselors, we're pretty intuitive people. We kind of recognize when we're not getting through to somebody. And we also are pretty expert at wrapping up a conversation and moving on to the next thing. Well, what that can be perceived as is agreement. I did not ever think of it that way until I kept hearing all of these reports that, I've been able to change a dozen counselors' minds about this. And when I would talk to the counselors who I knew had gone in there, they would all tell me the same thing, that, yeah, once I realized I wasn't getting anywhere, I kind of wrapped it up and moved on. And I was like, okay, did you state clearly at the end, thank you for your time. I can see we're not going to come to an agreement on this. I appreciate your service, and I look forward to speaking with you in the future, or anything to that effect. And they all were like, no, I just said thank you. Okay, so you have to restate that you have not been flipped. Your mind has not been changed. So it's important for you to very diplomatically and engagingly say something to the effect of, I really appreciate your willingness to talk with me about this. I still hold the belief that I walked in with, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to work together on this or another issue. That way there's no confusion about you're still being nice and still willing to work with that person, but there's no confusion that you don't agree with the stance that's being taken. So, did you guys see the news yesterday or today? Taken off notice. So this is not going to be pursued for filing. So that's great. Replaced with something else. We'll get to that in a minute. I think I have these in numerical order. But we got what we wanted on that one. What we wanted on this one was not to be singled out. We are not singled out. So that's good. Yay. The next piece of legislation that we're working on right now is SB4. How many of you are familiar with SB4? A little bit. Okay, so SB4 is really, the goal of SB4 is that the state Department of Education is prohibited from selecting the standards and curriculum for social and emotional learning in schools. So, for the purpose of character development. Character development is written in our laws. Schools are required to provide character development. Everyone's okay with that. Nobody wants to take that away. But they cannot provide social and emotional learning competencies for that instruction. So, we start looking into, what is this? Why is this happening? What do they actually want? Because sometimes what we have found is that bills get filed, they have to get filed within a certain time frame. But they can be changed, amended, pushed, pulled, and molded until it passes. So the language that you see on this website is not the language that it ever passes in. And people do tend to, I was at an event with John Ray Clemens, who is another Tennessee representative, or Nashville representative, and he was saying a lot of times people will just get the bill in there so that it's in there, and everybody knows it's not done. And they've got more research to do, they've got more information seeking, they're trying to make sure that everything is what they really want it to be. So there's a real good chance, one of the things that I had to learn is don't emotionally react to what's written right here, because that's going to change. So look at it, see what it is, find out what the intent of it is, and then we'll go from there. So what we're hearing about this one is that the reason that this is on here, if we're talking about going back to our mission of promoting counseling and allowing counselors to do their jobs, why would this be on here? This is what school counselors do. And school counselors are a very important part of the continuum of counseling services. So school counselors have been so focused on being able to provide social and emotional learning for their students. And it's National School Counselor Week. If you guys didn't know that. And there's this big promotion going around that it says guidance counselor with guidance crossed out and school written on it, right? So school counselors are different than guidance counselors. Guidance is one tiny aspect of what they do, but they're really there to provide for the social and emotional learning, which leads to academic success. So as we're looking at this, we're going, well, gosh, what does this mean for our school counselor standards? And a lot of the folks who wrote this legislation did not consider that. They didn't really realize that this would be aimed at what school counselors do. And the intent is that, so I've heard about 3 different things from various sponsors of the bill. So all the folks who are listed up there are sponsors of the bill, and it's really interesting to know that they're all coming at it from their own perspective. So if you think about a case study of any client that you can think of, and you ask 5 different counselors, what do you think is going on with this person? You're going to get 5 different answers, right? And nobody's wrong. Nobody's necessarily right either. I mean, that's just, counseling is subjective. So is legislation. They do their best to make it not subjective, but they're all coming at it from their own viewpoints on things. So one of them said, look, this isn't really about taking anything away from the schools. This is about, so each district has a person who's designated to be in charge of the social and emotional learning and some of the resources and coordinating all of the different care and services and resources that that district has. What one of the sponsors of the bill said is that we want that person to be the one who remains the one who decides what they use. We don't want the Department of Education saying, hey, Hohenwald, you need the same thing as Knoxville, you need the same thing as Johnson City, you need the same thing as Memphis, you need the same thing as Nashville. They wanted each district to be able to make the decision for themselves. Well, that makes sense. If that's what we're going for, that's great. But then, where do the resources come from and where's the accountability to actually implement it? So if we can get all of that stuff taken care of, then maybe this is a helpful piece of legislation. But then somebody else said, no, these social and emotional standards, I haven't read them, but they're really just trying to teach values. I haven't read them, but. Okay, so then we have to kind of go in and really help people understand, because what do you think of when you think of social and emotional standards? Just shout it out.
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness, conflict resolution, you guys already know, you're cheating. That's true. Those are some of the standards. What do you think our lawmakers who maybe never worked in a school think?
Honesty, trustworthy, things like that.
I wish. Honesty, trustworthiness. I don't think anybody would find issue with teaching that in schools. Unfortunately, the examples that they're using of what they're trying to make sure doesn't get baked into school curriculum are things like tolerance and what's another one that they said? The pronouns, the different pronouns that UT got in so much trouble for and actually defunded their diversity program a couple of years ago. And so what their argument is that those things should be taught by parents. And parents have the right to decide if that's what they want their children to learn, then that's great. Let them do that. But that shouldn't be coming from a state-sponsored school system. So that's one way of looking at it.
That's the guy that didn't even read them, right?
Yeah. That's the guy that didn't read them. Absolutely. And so when we're able to say, well, no, it's conflict resolution. Do you think that it's not important for kids to learn how to resolve conflict? Then, we get into that. So the things that lawmakers really, really care a lot about is anti-bullying. They really care a lot about anti-bullying, which seems a little counterintuitive. But they do. I have seen them absolutely lay each other out verbally over someone's insensitivity to students being bullied, children being bullied. And the other thing that they care a lot about is parents retaining the rights to raise their children the way that they want them raised and not being able to defer that to the state. Okay, I guess, I'm not a parent. I have 12 nieces and nephews and 3 additional godchildren. I will be the old lady who lives in a shoe and has so many children she doesn't know what to do, but I also want to be able to manage what my nieces and nephews and godchildren learn. So I can imagine if I were a parent, that would be times 10. So, okay, I can understand that. And that is where your counseling skills come in. That when I'm sitting across the room from a client and they're saying something that makes no sense to me whatsoever, I can't just say, well, that's dumb. I have to sit back and say, all right, how does that make sense to me if I can relate to that, or if I were in their shoes, what's my parallel? Okay, yeah, I can make sense of that. And then I can join with them and we can actually move forward towards what we both want, because what they want isn't necessarily a terrible thing. I might disagree with the way to get it, but that's a different story. So I do want to point out that these things here, are you guys familiar with the Tennessee General Assembly website? I have it saved, I have it bookmarked, so I can't tell you what the website is, but if you Google Tennessee General Assembly, it'll pop right up. And you can enter in, find a bill. And I actually have a video in a minute to show you how to find your legislator. But it tells you, here's what's happening in the Senate, and here's what's happening in the House. And so the reason that there are two numbers is that you have, oh, I have a laser pointer. Ha! There, it tells you've got what's happening in the Senate is that it was filed and it has moved through all of this administrative stuff, and now it's been referred to the Education Committee. So now we know that we need to be looking at the calendar for the Education Committee and find out when SB4 is going to come up for a hearing. So it's really helpful for that. And then this HB 0357 just means, okay, so there are people in the Senate and people in the House who want to see this happen. So it was filed, this is all administrative stuff, and it's also been sent to a subcommittee. So we have to watch 2 calendars and go to 2 sets of hearings and see if we can help make sure that the people who are making decisions on it really know and understand everything that's involved. So I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit so that we can get to some of the meatier stuff, but I definitely don't want to gloss over too much. If you have any questions about any of the bills, feel free to shout out. SB 30. Now this one says that they want to require that the words husband, wife, mother, father be given their natural and ordinary meaning without subtle construction that would limit or extend the meaning of the language, and it's based on biological distinctions between men and women, except when a contrary intention is clearly manifest. Whoa. Okay. So, men have penis, women have a vagina. That's what that means. And we're going to refer to them as such. Okay. Now, we know where this is headed. We know what this is aimed at. We also have to take a step back. So within TCA, we have a Human Rights Committee. We also have a Legislative Committee. Those two are separate for a reason. Anyone to take a stab at why that would be? Is this a human rights issue? Seems like it. Yeah. Is it something that interferes with your ability to practice counseling?
Yes.
How? This is not a right-wrong. This is how do you see it? So if you think it doesn't, tell me why. If you think it does, tell me why.
It doesn't inhibit our ability to practice counseling, but it does inhibit our client's ability to, to use it to self-actualize. It's an advocacy issue, not on our part, but on the part of our clients,
Okay.
our potential clients.
So you see this as something more around protecting the people we serve or might serve than protecting our ability to practice.
What
Okay.
about when the question of minors is presented, though? if minors is connected to what these terms are and that allows access or prevention of access, doesn't that become directly relative to our ability to serve our client?
Potentially. I think that's something to be explored.
Psychoeducation in schools is what comes to mind for me along those lines as well.
Okay. So this could limit someone's ability to access care. It could limit the ability to provide psychoeducation in schools. So maybe it does. This is, oh yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I also am just thinking, what's the test that one as a therapist would know who is a husband, who is a wife, based on, I mean, are we going to be doing genome, DNA testing to see what chromosomes are there?
It's a good question. So what's the practicality of this? Is this a statement that's being made that doesn't actually have any enforceable teeth? Mm-hmm.
Is this just saying the general public? Like, who is this for, this requirement that words be given their natural ordinary meanings? Literally just for...
It would be for any state organization.
State organization.
So
Okay.
if it's the Department of Health, the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, the Department of Education.
So like adoption paperwork for your school, when the parents fill it out, and it impacts all the paperwork aspects and how the client fills out that paperwork in order to gain services.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep. And then it would also apply to anyone who is serving clients through money from the state. So like I used to work at youth villages. The state of Tennessee was one of our biggest clients. I mean, we had most of our contracts in the program I worked in was through the state of Tennessee. It would definitely impact that. And I did have a couple of transgender clients that this would have been, well, now thinking about that particular case, it might not have changed much because of some other things. But, I mean, if things had been different for that client individually, this would have certainly played a big role. So, yeah.
Can you say what in the hell is meant by except when a contrary intention is clearly manifest?
No. I can try. My assumption is that if there's been biological change made, gender reassignment surgery, maybe? I don't, but then we're back to men have penis, women have vagina. So I'm not sure exactly. But I think that was probably inserted there as sort of a catch-all to say, we can come back and elaborate on this later. That there's more to it than this, we just don't know what it is yet. But that's just my assumption. Yes?
Is there any knowledge to be gained from the speed at which the dates transition when you're looking at this information online? So, for example, if the dates move rapidly or if they move slowly, does that indicate any level of like possibility or progress?
It's hard to know. I think in some cases yes, but in some no. So, for example, there had only been, as of yesterday at noon, there were only 800 bills filed so far. We expect 2,500 in total, and the filing deadline is today. So we know that there's a flurry of bills that are coming, and it could be that they're trying to sneak them in there at the last second and make sure that there isn't any media attention on them, and they're just shock and awe kind of thing. Or it could be that, it just takes a long time and it's really hard to write a bill, and I've tried to write one and it's not fun. And so, then once it gets filed, then it just moves on through. They also have a really weird schedule down there on Capitol Hill. So when they're in session, they're only in session Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So, because it's a part-time gig. So every single person who is a legislator has a full-time job elsewhere that has to just allow them to be gone for 3 days a week 4 months a year, unless they get called into special session, and then it's even more. They get their travel and their, all of that taken care of, lodging, everything, but they get paid $19,000 a year. So they obviously have to maintain employment elsewhere. So sometimes, and then they were here for swearing in, and they were gone for 2 weeks, and then they were back, but it was bill writing, and so you couldn't meet with anybody. And then now I was down there yesterday, and it was really kind of fun because, I like to sit back and observe chaos, and it was a lot of chaos going on. And but also there's uniformity to the chaos, and so you are not supposed to talk to a legislator if you're down there on the day before or the day of bill filing deadline. I was really glad that Chris told me that, because I was about to walk up to everybody, and he was like, no, that's not polite. That's not going to win you any friends. Because they're scrambling to try to get their bills done. So the calendar doesn't tell you much. It tells you something, but you're more likely to be wrong than right. Okay, so SB 341, this is probably my favorite bill that we have right now, because I love the intention behind it. I'm a little bit scared of the unintended consequences of it, but we've got a really good relationship with Senator Nicely, and we also have a really good intention behind the bill. So right now, some of you may know this, a lot of school counselors who are able to identify, okay, this child needs something more. They need to be referred to counseling. They can't make that referral because there are several lawsuits that have happened where if the school has made the referral, then it falls under special education, and they are liable for paying for that care. That could bankrupt any school district. So a lot of school counselors and teachers won't make the referrals because they're scared to death that the school district is going to get sued for care. There are several lawsuits that have happened across the state to that effect. So this basically says, of course they can make a referral. And of course the school district is not going to be on the hook for paying for it. What do you think the unintended consequence of that could be?
School councils might make too many referrals, or just...
Maybe. Probably not, but maybe. More likely, go ahead.
One thing that I've heard that why school districts are against referrals is because what happens with that counselor that you referred them to, how, if they're not receiving good services from that counselor, or if, let's say, that counselor decides to abuse their power with that client, then the parent's like, oh, this came from the school, we're going to blame the school for this bad experience we had with the counselor.
I guess that could be true in any setting, though. I mean, if you're making a referral to someone who's not a great clinician, I think a lot of systems, institutions would have that. I think that's an overcomable thing, but I can see where they're coming from on that. The biggest concern that they have, or that we have, is that this word prohibits the LEA or counselor from covering the cost of the student's referral or services. Well, the unintended consequence of that is that now, if there is something that does fall under special education, this legislation would decouple paying for that service on behalf of the child from the child getting the service. So we don't want that. We want the special education legislation that's federal to stand, so that if a child has a special education need for services to be successful in school, we want that to happen. What we want to avoid is what we're seeing right now of, little Susie is 13 and she's starting to exhibit some symptoms of disordered eating. Well, that's not necessarily going to impact her ability in school right away, but the sooner we can get in there and nip it, the better. And what's happening right now is that they can't make those referrals because they're afraid that it's going to fall under special education. So we want to be able to create some sort of a rubric for school counselors to be able to make that determination and those referrals as appropriate. Yeah.
This actually conflicts with some school board policies that don't allow school counselors to make referrals.
Mm-hmm.
So then if this bill passes, what then is the?
They would have to change their policies. So state law would trump school board policy.
I see there being a lot of pushback because of why board policy states that counselors cannot or not allowed to make those referrals.
What are those reasons?
One, that role has been designated to school social workers.
Okay.
If school counselors identify a need for services outside the school setting, you can provide a list and make that list available, but you can't provide a direct referral or recommendation.
So this is another really, really good example of some potentially unintended consequences. Senator Nicely cares about the intent behind the bill. He doesn't know these nuances. And so it's our job to go in and say, here's the pushback we might get, here's where some of that's valid, here's how we'd like to amend this bill so that it gets to the intention of students being able to get the services they need without putting anybody in a bind. So for me in private practice, if I'm working with somebody and I don't work with children anymore and I'm a little rusty. So if somebody comes in and they want me to see their child, I would need to refer them to somebody. But I'm only going to refer them to someone who I know is good at working with children. And I don't have a long list of that. I have maybe a short list. And so I could give them a list, maybe with an asterisk on one of them. But that might be, those are things for us to keep in mind and to take to Senator Nicely or any other senator, because they work often in teams, where Senator Nicely might say, you know what, Senator Yarborough, this is something that you know more about than I do. Why don't you help me with it? And so then we can sort of get some things involved that way. I saw a hand.
I was just going to mention too, a lot of times, in the district that I've worked in, is the recommendation that is made for counselors to share with families is that, start with your child's pediatrician. That's the referral, right? Okay. And as we know, that's a good step, one of the steps, but in terms of if it's not a medical concern that would fall under that umbrella of pediatric care, then that might be a limitation, or it might stop there instead of really getting the support they need.
And now we're getting into all of the challenges of integrated care and merging our medical system with our behavioral health care system. And so, I refer to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician says, looks like anxiety to me, but I don't treat anxiety, so call your insurance company and see who they recommend. I mean, it's sort of, when we've got this resource right there, you've got school counselors who know who they would be able to treat this child. So, well-intentioned, needs some work. So, and these kinds of comments, like when you see, I don't know how many of you are members of PCA, but you will be getting lots of emails from me if you are. And if you see some points that need to be made about these things, send it on over to me. I mean, there is not too much, there's no such thing as too much input from people who are experts at these things. Okay, so now, SB1 is gone, SB 449 is here. So basically what this says is SB1 applied to everyone. So now all the professional boards, all the licensing boards are going to be subjected to, let's see, where does it say? Government entities that establish or adopt guides to practice do so through the promulgation of rules, guides to practice, including codes of ethics, and other measures are required to ensure minimum quality of service. So when you read the full description, because this is just a snippet of it, it talks about public vetting. Won't that be fun? And then also approval from the state governing body, which is the General Assembly, and ultimately also includes the Attorney General. So I have a friend who is an Assistant Attorney General, and she texted me today and was like, I'm gonna do what? Okay, I'm gonna need some help on this one, because there are 150 professional boards. Everything from plumbers and electricians to dentists and nurses to counselors, and it's the whole gamut. So we're real curious to see what the other professional boards think about this. And yesterday when I was talking with the, I think it was the Chattanooga Free Times Press, he said, is this a little bit of misery loves company? Did you just get yourself out of hot water and bring everybody else in so that you weren't in this alone? And I was able to refer back to, and this is where having our really well laid out, thoughtful approach to things helps, because I was able to say, we've said from day one, if it's good for us, it's good for everyone. And if it's not good for everyone, then it's not good for us. And that was sort of where this came from. So I'm fairly certain that they were ahead of us before we made that statement. I'm fairly certain that they knew that it would play out this way, because they've been doing this a lot longer than I have. But I definitely am interested to see what some of the other professional associations think about this. And what was so fascinating was, so we've got a wonderful coalition, which I'll get to in just a second, but some of the folks who we really thought would be in our coalition said, why would I step into the limelight on this? Why would I put myself in that position? And on one hand, I kind of see where they're coming from. I mean, if I were to say to you guys, let's just pretend like you are all of our membership, and there's this bill over here that has nothing to do with us, but something to do with nurses. And I'm like, guys, we got to take a stand against this. What would you say? You say yeah?
Yeah.
Even if it meant you'd be pulled in?
Yeah, it's like, if it's going to impact nurses and it's going to set a precedent that's then going to be used to drag down counselors, you got to nip it in the bud.
I'm so glad you're here. Yeah, so the prevailing advice to those other organizations was keep your head down and your nose clean. You don't know anything about this. Doesn't affect you, don't say anything about it. And that's what most of them did. And what was so interesting, though, was that is what the professionals advised them to do. And then I would get all these secret emails of just don't tell my lobbyist. And so it was nice to know that they really were internally conflicted on how to handle it. And I think it does, it takes a lot of courage to stand up for something. It sort of takes us back to SB 30, where we're talking about the language and using the biological meaning of terms. And, we went back and forth for just a minute on, does it impact our ability to practice counseling? Does that mean that we don't have something to say about it? Does it guide us in how we decide what to say about it? It takes a lot of courage to say, you know what, just because it's the right thing to do, or just because it's something that we really care about, those aren't easy decisions to make. So our coalition, this was my first ever press conference last year, and I want to point out a few folks, and this is from last year. This is, how many of you are Davidson County residents? This is your representative, John Ray Clemens. He's an attorney and he is one smart guy. This is Diane Bradley, and she is president of the Marriage and Family Therapy Association. And then this is Art Terrazas. He is head of government relations for American Counseling Association. And then we have, this is Robbie Hutchins. She is me for Marriage and Family. So she's also president-elect and also legislative chair. So we commiserate. a lot. But we are a great team and we work really well together. This is Peter Wilson. He's a professor at Tribeca, and he's actually a psychologist, and he is a Christian therapist. And it was so amazing to see him stand up there and say, no, this is not, I represent the Christian counseling perspective, and this is not that. And that was pretty cool. So if you have a chance to read any of his stuff, it's floating around online, and you can find it pretty readily. And then this is Chris Sanders, and he is with the Tennessee Equality Project. And then that's me. So we have a couple of allies here. And what I'm most proud of is this middle line right here. That we've got what maybe at one time could have been considered competitors. And this is what Heather was getting at the beginning of this evening. We've all come together in ways that I don't think has ever been seen before. And I don't think that anything else could have brought us together in this way. So that's pretty cool. There's a silver lining. And I think it's also really neat to be able to say, you know what, this is our state, we live here too. And it's more important that we are together on this and we say that government needs to take a step back. So that's really neat to see that still working. Okay, so what now? How many of you guys have called your senator? Was it scary?
He hung up.
What? He hung up?
No, I didn't. It's been jammed. If you've tried.
Oh, okay.
It's been.
Okay.
So you get like through 7 or, not 7 or 8. You get like through 3 different steps and then you get to them and it's click. So.
Oh, wow. That's infuriating. This is also a really tough time to be able to get in touch with them because they're all, scrambling with what they're going to do. But here's, how about representatives? Anyone called your representatives? Okay, so representatives are usually, so things usually originate in the House and, in the Senate, and then get picked up in the House. And so usually you talk to your senator first and then your representative if you see that it gets picked up. And one of the mistakes I made last year was I just started calling everybody. And they were like, no, I'm not talking to you about this. It's not here. They're like, this might not even come to me. And so sort of having a little bit of savvy and knowledge, I still, if there's this much to know, I still only know that much. But this much gets me a lot farther than I got last year. So being able to look on that website and seeing where things are in the process will help you know who to call. So here are goals for what we're working on. Think about this every time you think you want to take action or you're deciding if you should take action. Or if more likely you don't actually want to take action but you think that you should. Think about these things. So our goals, we want to restore autonomy to our profession. Last year there was so much damage done to the counseling profession. We want to repair that. And then we also want to be able to actually impact public policy. I'm kind of tired of playing defense. I'd like to actually be proactive and get some stuff done. So we want to move some things forward there. But to do that, it requires a lot. And it's, I don't know if you guys know this, but within Tennessee Counseling Association, there is not one person whose full-time job is the Tennessee Counseling Association. So that's why we rely so heavily on grassroots and advocacy and our membership to help us out. It's been really, really cool to have our members send me screenshots of bills before they're even hitting the news. That's awesome. That's how you know you got people engaged. That's how you know people feel like, okay, we got to get in there, we got to get some stuff done. And that's so much fun to see. Last year, everyone was kind of like, what do we do? What do we do? And this year, it feels like everyone's like, well, here's what I'm going to do. And then they, kind of get in there and get some stuff done. And I love it. So building and maintaining relationships with lawmakers and other lobbyists I think, we don't need to go through every single point on this slide, but I definitely want to talk about that one. How many of you have ever done something different because someone told you how dumb you were for doing it the way you did it to begin with? More than I thought. I never have. Usually if someone tells me how dumb I am, I just walk away. I'm just not going to talk to that person, I'm not going to listen to that person. Lawmakers are no different. It is important that we manage our emotions when we're talking to them, because as we've already talked about tonight, they see things from one angle with no expertise in the area. And it's our job to develop a relationship with them so that we can be the expertise for the areas that impact what we do. Great example of this is Kat, our president, who lives in Knoxville, met with her senator, and they met for probably an hour and 20 minutes, which is a little longer than expected. And he's a pretty conservative Republican. He's not all the way right, but he's fairly predictably conservative. And he was saying to her, look, I hear ya. I don't know anything about what you're talking about, but I hear ya. And I'm going to call you when I have some questions, and I'm going to really need to know a lot more about this. And so when yesterday, when the press conference happened that Senator Johnson was pulling the bill, he sent her an email, like just completely unsolicited. He emailed her to say, I don't think I had anything to do with this, but I do sit next to him in chambers, and I did tell him I wouldn't support it. Can you imagine getting that email from someone that you're sitting there wondering, does this person think I'm crazy? Does he even know what I'm talking about? And then you get an email that's like, I was with you, and I want you to know that I remember you, and I want you to be aware of that. That's so cool. So, yay for counselors. So our grassroots advocacy is really important as well, and this is the hardest part. So as I grow our legislative reach, our legislative work, I think the next thing we need to add is someone within the organization who all they do is manage our grassroots advocacy campaigns, because it is hard work. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. Because has anyone ever participated in a day on the Hill? Yeah? Did you organize it?
No, but I was part of a school coalition that did.
Okay, good. And so how chaotic was it when you were there?
Very.
Uh-huh. Did you
and
see?
it took like months of planning beforehand because it was for a for-profit school.
Okay, yeah. So very strategic in what meetings got set, who was in them. This might not be a great example, but it's one that speaks to me. Anybody been to Napa wine country? Okay, so have you planned your itinerary? And you got, this person has an appointment open here, but it's 10 miles this way, and then you've got another one over here, and it's, overlapping, and you're trying to do the logistics, and that's not me. That is not my strength. But that is what a day on the Hill is. And then you have to pair people up in the right matches, too. So if I am, because I'm the legislative chairperson, I might know a little bit more about a particular bill than someone who lives in Johnson City, but I need that person from Johnson City so we have the constituent. Because the first question is, now where do you live? And if you say Nashville, la 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 la, this is done. So you need the constituent, but you also need the person who is comfortable in that setting and in that conversation. So Day on the Hill, there's one, Heather actually sent me information about one that is March 8th, I think. So I'll include that when we send out the rest of the materials. I don't know anything about the organization that's putting it on, but it says it's over 400 people who care about mental health.
It's usually Mental Health America. They do theirs in March.
They might have changed their name. It's a coalition, so they may have partnered with others, and the coalition does not have a website. So
It's called Behavioral Health Coalition.
that's what it is. Yes. which Mental Health America may be leading the organization of that. So even if you're not participating in a day on the Hill, visiting your elected officials is so important. I remember Kat, so I met with my senator in his office. Kat met with hers at Panera. I mean, it doesn't matter. If they're at home, if they have an office, if you happen to be in Nashville anyway, doesn't matter. They'll meet with you. Just, you know, I would recommend that you tell them, you just tell me where to be. Letters and phone calls are great, but one of the things that is much less used is volunteering on campaigns. So we've got midterm elections coming up in 2 years, and I already got invited to a fundraiser. We got 2 years until this person is up for re-election, and they're already starting fundraisers. So you can go ahead and figure out in your district who's up for re-election. Go ahead and reach out to that person and say, let me help. What do you need? Stuffing envelopes, handing out flyers, pouring coffee, whatever. They will remember that, and they will appreciate that, and it goes a lot further. What's not on here, because it's not grassroots, it would be more professional, is we need a counselor to be elected. Anyone want to run? I thought I saw a hand. So when I've said that before, I've actually gotten a couple of people who have said yes, but that takes a lot of time and a lot of money. So that's sort of a long game for us. But I think, you know, if we're so unhappy with the way that we're being represented, we can change that. Oh, are you volunteering to
No,
run?
I had a question.
Oh.
No, definitely not. You're talking a lot about specific legislation being pro, against, etc.
Yeah.
Are you looking at developing the organization to the point where you can have like official endorsements for candidates, doing opposition research to see who they might have running against them in the future to try and nip that in the bud before it happens, that kind of work?
That is part of the long game. If you know a fast track to get there, come talk to me afterwards. This is, again, being part of a volunteer organization with varying degrees of experience, none, prior to now. We are always looking for people who know how to get that stuff done.
A politician's first and foremost job is to get reelected and then serve the constituents second for the most part. And so official endorsements, they're very afraid to lose those. And especially an organization that can represent the entire profession statewide.
So one of the things that we have started to do with our friends who are marriage and family therapists and our friends who are members of NPI and TLPCA and our friends who are licensed clinical pastoral therapists is to say, okay, if we are all on one board, there is no reason for us not to be one voice. And so TCA is 1,000 members. If you put all of us together, roughly we think we might be looking at closer to like 5,000. So, I mean, we just, quintupled our size by working with our friends who care about the same things we care about. And I think that really goes a long way too. And also being able to pull in people from more remote parts of the state. So right now we're pretty heavily viewed as Nashville and maybe a little bit of Memphis and a little bit of Knoxville. But we got to reach all the corners and all of the little nooks and crannies of Tennessee, because there are people all across Tennessee who want the things that we want, but they just get drowned out. They don't have anyone there with them supporting them. And that was made fairly clear to me last year when I was meeting with some representatives who serve on the health committee in the House of Representatives, but I'm not their constituent, so they could speak pretty freely with zero recourse at the ballot. But basically what they were saying is, look, you know what, you're a progressive group of people in Nashville. My people who vote for me do not care about what you think. They don't care about what you want. So we really have to pull in the folks from across the state who actually do want the same things and give them a voice and a platform too. So as we're building our political strength, we have to look at our internal resources and our external factors. So now we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of the hows and the whats. The first thing we have had to do is build professional consensus. And you know, the hardest thing last year when SB 1556 dropped in our laps was we didn't know what our membership thought of it. And so we could make some assumptions, but then we would also get some really interesting feedback from some folks who would say, you know, I just don't believe that people can do what you're saying we are required to do. And it's not an acceptable answer to say, well then, go back to school. That didn't work. So being able to build consensus, you know, I think a great example is SB 30, that we're going to have some people who are our members who are on both sides of that, who are going to say, look, you know what, biology is biology, and until you change your biology, then those are the words. I don't know what the big deal is. Then you're also going to have people who say, wrong. That is not correct, that's not accurate, that's not fair, that's not how you respect dignity of each person. So being able to know and being able to have a place where regardless of what you believe about an issue, you're not alienated for having that belief. That's the hard part. Because one of the things that I said last year, so I don't know if you guys are aware, but the bill last year, SB 1556, that originated from a constituent who is a counselor who has a Christian counseling practice in Brentwood, went to his senator, Senator Johnson, asked him to put this legislation forward. When I talked to Senator Johnson on the phone, and he said, I didn't just make this up out of nowhere. People in your profession wanted this. They brought it to me. And I said, I gotta tell you, I don't know those people. And he offered to introduce me, and so I met with him. And I've met with him several times. And one of the things that I said to him the very first time I met with him was, listen, you're not a member of TCA, you're not a member of TLPCA, you're not a member of NPI, you're not a member of ACA, so you're not a member of any of the professional organizations that help determine what our code is or should be. And he was like, no, there's no place for me there. I don't align with any of those. And he was like, and I'm not alone. You know, there are a lot of us out there. And I said, okay, so when you realized that you had this conflict with our code, I didn't hear anything about it, and I think I would have if you'd come to TCA. Did you bring it to TCA? No, okay. Did you bring it to any of the other professional organizations? No. Did you go to ACA? Oh no, they wouldn't want to hear it. Did you go to the licensing board? No. So what happened was, here's a person who thinks differently, and apparently there are many who think similarly to him. I wouldn't say that there are more who think similarly to him than there are who disagree, but there are people out there who believe that way, who practice with our license, who represent our profession to whomever they come into contact with, and he'd been so alienated from the profession that we didn't even know what he was doing. And so I think it's really important that we maintain an openness to different ways of thinking, that at the end of the day, even if I disagree with what you say, even if I disagree with the direction that the organization is going to take this, I'm still going to show up. Because when it comes up again, I'm going to say what I think again. And maybe between now and then, I'm going to be able to help people understand where I'm coming from and change their minds to think the way I do. So it took me 4 times, 4 different meetings, to hire a lobbyist. When they told me no the first time, I cried. I did. But just for a second. And then, you know, I got it together and I was like, okay, I got 2 choices. I can either accept it and just let it go, or I can try it again. This is something we haven't done in years. We're not used to having to operate this way. Okay, fine. So I brought it back, got shot down, brought it back, got shot down. So finally, I was like, look, this is the last time I'm gonna ask, but if we don't do something, it's gonna be bad. And then that time, it changed, something changed, and I don't know what it was, but probably just because they were tired of hearing me ask. So I'm fine, I'm not above wearing people down. I'm the youngest of 4, I can wear people down. So being willing to allow people in to have a different perspective than what we do, and being willing and courageous enough to share your perspective if it's different than the group think, and then having enough integrity to stay if you don't get your way. Those are big things. And all for what? A professional organization? I mean, you know, no one's getting paid here. So it's a big ask. But I ask it of you and everyone who may or may not be members. If you're considering being a member, there's membership forms here. So the other thing is member motivation. One of the things that I've heard a lot is, wasn't that what we have a lobbyist for? And what our lobbyist says in return, what Chris says is, absolutely, that is what I'm for and that is what I'm doing. But they want to hear from you. And so when I was meeting with Jeff Yarborough, and he was saying, I need examples, I need faces to put with these stories that you're telling me. So I had told him about last year when 1556, 1840 became law. I had 2 of my clients call me who are dealing with their sexual orientation, and they've got a lot of ambivalence about it, and it's a real issue for them. They knew that I was working on that bill. They knew that I was going down to testify against that bill, and yet they still, 2 of my clients called me afterwards and said, so I guess you don't have to work with me anymore? And I was like, well, technically I never had to work with you. I always had a mechanism to refer. But yes, that is basically what this bill says, or what this law says. I'm like, well, should I find another counselor? And it was just heartbreaking to know that these are 2 people who I've worked with for a couple of years each, and they're still that insecure about, I mean, they both have lots of attachment issues that we've been working through. And so here we are, and then it just gets reignited for them. And so when I was telling Jeff Yarborough about that, he said, I want to meet those people. And I was like, no, absolutely not. But that's what they need. They need faces with stories. And so as we start to really develop some of this expertise within the legislature, putting out the invitation for our clients who are well and stable and interested in participating is actually something that could be healing for them, but that has to come from them. You know, it's not something that I think as an organization, as a profession, it's something that we need to really wrestle with and see what's the best way to do that. We've talked about relationships. I want to play this for you real quickly. This was me checking on checking on a senator. Can you see what's happening? So all I did was I went to my Google search bar and typed in Tennessee General Assembly, and it was the first thing that came up. I clicked on it. I went to the corner, which you can't see right now, where it said Find My Legislator, and you click on that, you put your address in, and this is what you get. It's like magic. It tells you who they are. So then I clicked on Jeff Yarborough. He does not know that he is our example of the evening, by the way. So if you see him, if you know him, let him know. He's made famous tonight. But it'll tell you, so first it'll tell you his personal info. So it'll say, what district, and, is he married, does he have kids, that kind of stuff. So you can find out how you can relate to him on that level. It'll show what committees he's on. The second tab shows the committees. And so you can know the things that, he's responsible for making decisions on, the things that he is responsible for having a deeper knowledge about, and that's important for us. And then it also shows community involvement, and this is where I really spend a lot of time trying to understand what's important to this person. How do I connect with this person? So he happens to be on the personal info page. It says where he's from. He's from Dyersburg, Tennessee. I have friends from Dyersburg. And so I'm able to kind of connect on, if I'm sitting in his office and it's getting awkward and it's, we're sort of totally missing each other, all misaligned, then I can say, hey, do you happen to know, and it'll sort of give us a solid ground where we can meet each other and remember that we're just one human talking to another. The other thing that I noticed for him is that he is involved in the National Bar Association and the Tennessee Bar Association. I'm involved with the American Counseling Association and the Tennessee Counseling Association. So we've got that in common. We both really value our profession. So it's easy to relate to him on those ways. So I would encourage all of you, on this form, again, it says, meeting with your legislator, and I think the second bullet point is schedule a meeting with your legislator. It says at least a month in advance. I would say, just anytime you can, schedule a meeting. But before you do, one way to feel comfortable doing that is to get to know who you're going to meet. So this was kind of a punch to the gut a little bit last year. So those first couple of questions. Do legislators know my profession or its members? What do you think the answer to that was? You give advice, right? You tell people what they need to do instead, right? Well, no. If they do know, what opinions do they have about that? So this is not exactly an experience from the legislature, but when I first started engaging with the business community, I was at some kind of a business function networking mixer thing, and someone was like, well, what do you do? And I told him, and he was like, oh, professional babysitter. And I was like, whoa. Someone had a bad experience in counseling one time. Not the way to start off a good relationship on his part or mine. And so really knowing and understanding, what do you think of counselors? What's our reputation? What do you know about the counseling profession? And is my profession or its members seen as influential, or are they unpopular? That gets exactly to the endorsements issue. That, when I say I represent 1,000 Tennesseans, all of a sudden, ears prick up a little bit. When I say I'm a counselor, they're like, oh, okay, whatever. And it just doesn't really resonate. So being able to build our influence. Now, that has changed a little bit. It was recommended to me that when I go down to the Capitol this session, that I not go with some of the people that I went with last year. And that maybe I should consider cutting my hair and wearing glasses. Because we were viewed as, who are these people? Why are they making such a fuss? Why do they want to discriminate against their own members? That was the rhetoric around last year, that we were discriminating against people who wanted to be counselors because we wouldn't let them put their religion first. And so it's really interesting to know that as we're moving through this process of becoming known, we have some hurdles to overcome. Now, I think the best way to overcome that hurdle is to be, well, she was actually pleasant. Oh, she was kind of nice. A little quirky, but I can deal with that. That's great. That means that they'll be willing to talk to you again. So being willing to not shy away from what you think they might think about you. Lots of mind reading. Also really looking at you're the expert, and remembering that you're calling them to consult for them on something which they know little about. You're giving them help. And when you think about it that way, then it removes a lot of that pressure and a lot of that fear of, hey, you know what, I just wanted to make sure, you know, it's really tricky. Even people who are in the field, even people who are doing their internships and practicums, they still struggle with knowing how to do client-centered therapy and what it means to put the client first and what it means for me to, put my beliefs aside so that I can work with this person. As a married woman, I've got pretty strong beliefs about infidelity. That doesn't mean that I don't work with someone who's struggling with infidelity. As a woman, I have pretty strong feelings about the treatment of women. That doesn't mean I don't work with people who have engaged in domestic violence. It's tough stuff, but it's much broader than any one particular issue that gets grabbed onto. And I think that got lost because everything we do matters. There's such a high cost to what we do. So one of the things I observed last year was on the negotiating skills piece, one of the constituents was telling me, who's our member, was meeting with a legislator, senator, and he, about 4 minutes into the conversation was like, oh, he's a lot better at this than I am. But then once he remembered, wait a minute, I sit in session with people all day, every day, who do things that I totally disagree with, who see the world in ways that I do not, and I'm able to connect with them. What's different here? The difference is that I'm not in therapy, I'm not in a session, but otherwise it's the same skills, it's the same negotiating skills. So, when I was working, yesterday I had a session with a client who told me that she was feeling suicidal, as she does sometimes. And so, the negotiation process of how long can you keep yourself safe? What measures can you take? What are the processes that need to be put in place? That's all the same skills with just very different content. But if I had dug my heels in and said, no, don't do that. Has that ever worked? I'm not sure. Maybe it has, but I'm not going to be the one to try it. So using the same skills to negotiate. Our external factors, this was really tough for us because so many people in the public think that we're just kind of touchy-feely, fluffy, and what we want is just, different than what people actually need. And so knowing what the public thinks about our issue, not just nationally, because the national conversation is very different from our local and state conversations. And if you reference a national conversation to a state lawmaker, what do you think their answer is? Move there. Go. You don't fit in here? Okay. If we aren't what you want us to be, go where they are. So being really careful to make sure that you're only referencing what's in your backyard and that you're not referencing things that are on a national scale. Not because it's wrong or inaccurate, just because it's ineffective. And that is the hardest part, is recognizing the difference between right and accurate and ineffective. Because that's what we saw last year with a lot of the hearings in the health subcommittee. The people who were advocating on our side of the issue, everything they said was right. Everything they said was accurate. But very little of it actually helped. So my favorite example of that, also my most disheartening example of that, is when they were interviewing some members of our professional board, they said, well, what comes first, ethics or laws? Show of hands. What comes first, ethics? Laws. Trick question. You're both right, because laws are the baseline and ethics rise above that. So if you put your ethics first, you will be, by default, putting laws just as high as ethics. So it is unethical for you to practice unlawfully. What? And so then they took that, the members of the House subcommittee, took that to mean, well, I don't know about these guys. They put their ethics first. Because laws are embedded in ethics. And so being able to understand some of those nuances and being able to kind of play that game. Now, I will say, when you're talking to your representative, if you're talking to them in person, on the phone, one-on-one, doesn't matter, they will not gotcha. They want your vote. They're going to be kind, they're going to be courteous. Even if they disagree with every single thing that comes out of your mouth, they're still going to be kind and courteous. It's when you're testifying on the floor and they're trying to make points and they're trying to get things across to other members and they're trying to move their agenda forward, that's when you're going to get the gotchas. And that's fine. There are those of us who can handle that, and that is why we have chairs and lobbyists, and we ask members to do things that are different from that. So, the other thing that's really important here is we spent a lot of time talking this year before this session got started of what can we tolerate. So here's our overarching goal. This is what we really want to happen, but what if we just make it to the 50-yard line? What if we can only get it to the 20-yard line? You know, how far back are we willing to go towards our end zone to be able to be okay with where we are? And then also looking at, okay, here's what might happen this year, but what does that set up for next year and the next year and the next year? So one of the bills that is coming is not going to pass this year. And the people who are bringing it forward are probably going to spend about $150,000 to bring it forward, knowing that this is not the year for it. But this is the year to get people comfortable with it. And then we'll try it again. And then we'll try it again. So we ain't got that kind of money. We're not playing a game that long. Yeah. So it's not our bill that I'm referring to. You'll know it when you see it. Not mine to disclose. I'm a professional secret keeper, so I'm going to honor that. But when we look at what can we tolerate, that is such an important question. And that is the thing that, as a coalition, myself and the other presidents and presidents-elect and legislative chairs of the other organizations have really wrestled with. That we feel a strong obligation to our members to get it all the way down into the end zone. But that might not be possible every single time. And so how do we communicate that and how do we message that so that you guys still know what we're working towards and that we're still on board and that we're still aligned. And that's why I was talking earlier about if something doesn't go the way you think it should or you want it to, that doesn't mean leave. That means stay and try it again.
It's kind of like the counseling skill of scaling, right? You're going to have to make a little movement.
Yes.
Before you make a lot, right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for bringing another counseling skill. So here's where we are. The very last thing that Senator Yarborough said to me as I was leaving his office was, you guys really need to organize. And I was like, oh, I have a slide on that. So here's where things stand. Every single one of these boxes, it looks all nice and neat, and that we all fit into these boxes and all these boxes are connected. In reality, none of these boxes are actually in a box. The contents of these boxes are not in the box that has their name on it. And the boxes are definitely not all connected. So I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and there were mental health professionals, insurance companies, representatives from some large provider systems, and then a couple of professional organizations there. We were complimented on that we didn't actually hit each other because the fighting was that big. So it was the difference between the content of the conference was medically assisted treatment for addictions versus abstinence-based treatment for addictions. And I tell you what, I have never seen fireworks like that before. And it's because it's life or death. You know, when you're talking about substance use disorders, people die. And some people think that the only way to really, really get clean and sober is abstinence only, and that's it. Anything else just sets you up to slide backwards, or to be dependent on something else that's going to lead right back to something. And then you've got other people who say it's inhumane to make somebody detox without some care to manage those symptoms. So this is not where we are today. This is what we're working towards, that we've got the entire mental health profession on board with each other, moving the entire mental health and behavioral health industry forward. So we've got lots of opportunity for that right now. One of the other companies that I had a meeting with recently is working to put assessments in all primary care offices. That's great, except that what are they going to do when they get diagnosed? They didn't have an answer either. So, but it's one step forward. And it's progress that they were actually coming to us, because the people who were putting the assessments in the physicians' offices were not mental health people. So the fact that they were reaching out to the mental health providers to say, yeah, we know, we don't know, is progress. And so as we start to share a vision for what the mental health profession needs to be, that has implications legislatively as well. We really need a strategy for elections and campaigns, as you so well described. And we need to get some counselors elected into office that will remain a standing invitation. Show hands. Okay, still thinking about it? Okay, fair. We also are really looking at, there are other professions who have done this so well. Why are we not learning from them? Doctors and lawyers are more legislators are either doctors or lawyers than any other professions. Oh, and accountants. Well, doesn't that just make sense? So we really need to make sure that we get represented, not just because we're calling and telling them what we think, but we're actually in there. And then our tactics are mobilizing members, organizing events, and then we've got some media campaigns that we're working on too.
Wait, come back.
There we go. There we go. So we're just about to wrap up. The last couple things I want to talk about have been a little bit discussed, but the thing that hasn't been discussed is moving from grassroots advocacy to actually organizing and formalizing a political action committee. And so that's on the table. And anybody who's interested in that, that is a job. That is not a volunteer position. It's a job that is unfunded. So you'd be responsible for getting it funded. And it's a job that is also fairly unstructured. I mean, it's not as if they're forming a pack is really easy. I mean, I could do that right now in probably 5 minutes. Actually running a pack is very challenging. And some of the things that we learned from last year is that not only did the people who got stuff done have lobbyists, they had PACs. So we're watching from others and learning and seeing what works. And we're trying to get there as quickly as we can. What's really kind of cool and what used to really frustrate me, but I've done some reflection on it, and I have realized that the reason people treat us as though we should be doing more than what we are is because we did what we did so well. That we've set an expectation that we actually know what we're doing. And so they're expecting all of this, output from us. And we're going, wait a minute, we're still Little League. We're not ready to play at your level yet. But, I mean, the fact that that's what they're expecting means that we've shown them that that's what we can do. So, kudos to you guys. So, just a couple of frequently asked questions. And I think this is probably really important in light of 447, I think is the number of the bill. When we're looking at what is the relationship between the Tennessee General Assembly, our licensure board, our professional associations, and the licensees. Because that was one of the first questions I got last year was like, what do you mean the Tennessee General Assembly, what do you mean our senators and representatives have anything to say about our code of ethics? Why are we even having this conversation? Well, guess what? They own our license. They own it. They give us the privilege of having it. And so what that means, and that's true of any license that anybody has, the state legislature gives the privilege of having that license. So we kind of have to work with them. What happens here, though, is that we've got the licensed professionals who are either us or will be us in the coming years. So the legislature owns the license, we get the license, but once we have it, we've got these professional organizations that write the codes. We've opted to use the National Association's code. So we may be able to still do that. We may be able to kind of still do that. We will at least be able to kind of still do that. We'll put it that way. So the professional organizations write the codes, and then the licensing board upholds the codes. So they don't right now write the code, but they did decide whose code to use. So if now what happens is that they have to compile a code, then how many codes could they pull from? Really, as many as they want. I mean, infinite. Who knows how many codes of ethics there are out there? But of national counseling organizations, there are five codes of ethics. And some of them we can kind of knock out because they wouldn't really make much sense. But we've got ACA, AMCA, the American Mental Health Counseling Association, NBCC, National Board for Certified Counselors, KCREP, but they probably won't use KCREP because that's more for educational standards. But they do still have a code of ethics for practice because of internship and practicum students. And then also there's the American Association of Christian Counselors. And so in Tennessee, they could pull from any and all of those and compile their own code. They could also pull from Nebraska's code, or they could write their own code. And we just don't know what's going to happen. We also know that the board is made up of 5 individuals who are appointed by the governor. So if the governor, we don't know who the governor is going to be. We have a gubernatorial election coming up, and that person, when our board members roll over and roll off the board, that person could appoint someone who maybe we'd be really excited about, but maybe we wouldn't. We just don't know. So these are things to sort of be thinking about in terms of like why we're so invested in this issue. It's not as simple as, okay, so we'll just write a code. Yeah, and also these other things that we just mentioned. So, any other questions or comments? We are at time, so I want to respect everyone's time, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has of them. Okay?
Before you all leave, I just want to really thank Lisa. Many of you might not know this, but all of this work that she's been doing all last year, totally voluntary. She was not paid at all. So I just really want to thank you.
Well, thanks. Thank you.